Assalamualaikum and a very good day to everyone. I am Idina Sofia binti Azman with metric number 302320. Today we are from Group 1. We will present and explain to all of you about general principles in constitutional interpretation and federalism. Before I continue, let me introduce all of my group members. The first one is Siti Nur Suryani binti Ibrahim. The second one is Ainul Ashikin binti Arif Zaidi. The next one is Maria Usun Sugang. And the last member is Chen Ken Ziong. I am going to start with the introduction of this topic. Constitutional interpretation, in general, refers to the process of understanding and applying a country's constitution. It involves interpreting the fundamental law of a nation to determine its meaning, scope, and implications for legal and societal matters. In Malaysia, constitutional interpretation refers to the process of understanding and assigning meaning to the provisions, principles, and clauses in the Federal Constitution. This interpretation aims to clarify the Constitution's intent, scope, and application in various legal contexts. Federal Constitution serves as the supreme law of the land, establishing the framework for governance, defining the structure of government institutions, delineating powers, and safeguarding fundamental rights of individuals. Constitutional interpretation involves the judiciary's role in elucidating the meaning and implications of constitutional provisions when resolving legal disputes or addressing constitutional questions. Guidelines to form constitutional interpretations are obligatory as it is collectively shape the process of constitutional interpretation in Malaysia, emphasizing fidelity to the Constitution's text, intent, and principles while adapting to changing societal needs and legal developments. The judiciary's role in upholding constitutional values remain crucial in maintaining the rule of law and protecting fundamental rights. That's all from me. Thank you.
A few methods of constitutional interpretation. Firstly, textualism or originalism. This method focuses on the actual word that used in the Constitution and seek to understand their original meaning when interpretation the Constitution. Textualism focuses on the plain meaning of the text, while originalism focuses on the intent of the framers. The main objective is to restrict judicial activism by limiting judge discretion and preventing personal bias or policy preference for influencing constitutional interpretation. There are three advantages of this method. First, provide objective and stable approach to constitutional interpretation. Second, both approach also provide a consistent framework or legal analysis and decision making. Third, help prevent judges from imposing the personal belief or policy preference onto the constitution. However, there are the disadvantages of this method, which is textualism or originalism may struggle to address modern challenges that were not foreseen by the framers. A few methods of constitutional interpretation. Firstly, textualism or originalism. This method focuses on the actual word that used in the Constitution and seek to understand their original meaning when interpretation the Constitution. Textualism focuses on the plain meaning of the text, while originalism focuses on the intent of the framers. The main objective is to restrict judicial activism by limiting judge discretion and preventing personal bias or policy preference for influencing constitutional interpretation. There are three advantages of this method. First, provide objective and stable approach to constitutional interpretation. Second, both approach also provide a consistent framework or legal analysis for legal analysis and decision making. Third, help prevent judge from imposing the personal belief or policy preference onto the constitution. However, there are the disadvantage of this method, which is textualism or originalism may struggle to address modern challenges that were not foreseen by the framers. Balancing test. This method used when there are conflicting right or interests protected by the constitution to decide which one should be prioritized. The main objective is to maintain the constitutional guarantee while considering the interests or value of other parties. The advantage of this method are is help protect fundamental rights by ensuring that they are not absolute and can be limited when conflicting interests exist. Second, this approach allows court to consider the specific circumstance of each case and find a fair and reasonable balance that take into account the evolving needs of society. The advantage of this method are it may lack clarity in providing clear guidelines or standard for court to follow. Second, can make it challenging for individual or legal professional to predict or anticipate the outcome of case, since the test requires a case-specific analysis and consideration of various factors. So it can be difficult to establish clear precedent or guideline for future case.
Next, I will explain about the methods of living constitution in the constitutional interpretation. So basically, living constitution is the way it should be interpreting in a way that adapts to the changing needs and values of society. By using the living constitution, the current social, political, and cultural context was considered. The advantage of this method is it was really relevant since it can be applied to new and unexpected case that the people who wrote the constitution can't predict. Next, it also protect the fundamental rights. It considering how our understanding of rights has changed over times since the current social, political, and cultural context was considered. The disadvantage of this method is it gives judges too much power. Judges have too much powers to interpret law according to their own personal values and beliefs. Other than that, it also lack of stability, since the constant reinterpretation may make the meaning and application of the constitution are constantly changing. The application of living constitution in this case is the court said fundamental rights in Part 2 of the Constitution must be interpreted generously and that a prismatic approach must adopted to the interpretation. Next, the constitutional interpretation method included judicial precedent. Basically, judicial precedent means after a court makes decision on legal issue, that decision becomes a precedent and usually lower courts are required to follow these precedents. So what the advantages of this method? It promotes consistency in application of laws by following past decision. It also maintaining fairness of the legal system since it basing rulings on previous precedents rather than various of individual views. But it also got disadvantages like stifles development since following precedents too rigidly can inhibit the natural evolution of laws and principles to address new situations. Other than that, it also perpetuates mistakes, since relying on flawed reasoning or assumptions in past cases locks in errors and affects legal coherence. So the last constitutional interpretation that I will present is pragmatism. So basically, pragmatism refers to an approach that focuses on the practical, real-world consequences and usefulness of different interpretations, rather than just historical intent or text. Pragmatism also considering functionality, flexibility, forward thinking, learning, and emphasis on outcomes. It's just not rigid interpretations disconnected from practical governance needs. So the advantages of pragmatism is its responsiveness. It considering future impacts and alternatives allow more dynamic responsiveness to emerging challenges rather than rigidly bound by history alone. It also really relevant. It keeps interpretations aligned with current social, economical, and technological. But the disadvantages of pragmatism is it was really unpredictable. The greater flexibility in understanding open concepts could make ruling appear arbitrary and undermine dependable guidelines for state and public behavior. The application of pragmatism in the case referred is the forward-thinking analysis. There's sentences stated in the case. The result may have well been different if the section had prohibited blah 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 blah. By including this statement, the court showed a forward-looking perspective rather than limiting its analysis only to the specific case facts and issues at hand. The application of pragmatism in this case also include flexible understanding of legal context. Rather than just taking a strict textual definition of terms like association and personal liberty, the court applied a broader, more flexible and contextual understanding aligned with current realities. That's all from the methods of constitutional interpretation. Next presenter will present about the guidelines of this method of constitutional interpretation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Siti Nasrani binti Ibrahim and my metric number 276871. I will present the detailed guidelines of constitutional interpretation. Constitutional interpretation refers to the process of understanding and applying the provisions of a constitution. Constitutions are legal documents that establish the fundamental principles and framework of a government, defining the powers and limitations of its branch as well as the rights of individuals. As society evolves and faces new challenges, the need arises to interpret the Constitution in a way that addresses contemporary issues. There are 6 detailed guidelines of constitutional interpretation. The first one is textualism or originalism. Second is living constitution. Third, pragmatism or functionalism. Fourth, precedence or stare decisis. 5, structuralism. And 6 is balancing test. Okay, next going further. Textualism or originalism. This approach emphasizes interpreting the Constitution based on its original language and the intent of its framers at the time it was drafted and ratified. Textualists argue that the plain meaning of the word should guide interpretation. Second, living constitution. This perspective views the Constitution as a dynamic and adaptable document. Proponents of this approach argue that constitutional interpretation should take into account the evolving norms, value, and societal changes, and that the Constitution principles should be applied to address contemporary issues. Third, pragmatism and functionalism. This approach focuses on the practical implication and consequences of different interpretation. It seeks to achieve the overarching goals and purpose of the Constitution rather than strictly adhering to original intent or plain meaning. Precedents or stare decisis. Legal decision and precedent play a crucial role in constitutional interpretation. Courts often rely on previous rulings to guide their decisions, providing consistency and stability in the legal system. Okay, next for structuralism. This approach involves interpreting the Constitution by considering the overall structure of the document, the relationship between its different parts, and the allocation of powers among different branches of government. Okay, last but not least is balancing tests. In some cases, courts use balancing tests to weigh competing interests and determine the constitutionality of a law or action. This approach involves assessing the degree of infringement on individual rights against the government interests.
In conclusion, the Siwarasa Rasi versus Jabatan Pegom Negara case in the 2010 underscored the significance of comprehending the Constitution. The Federal Court emphasized that laws, including constitutional amendment, must align with the fundamental principle unless expressly permitted by the Constitution. The case imparts valuable lessons including scrutinizing language and original in-text, acknowledging the potential for amendment, considering regulatory objective, understanding historic context, referencing precedent ruling, and equitably balancing rights. Upholding essential elements and guiding principle ensures a holistic understanding of the Constitution. Adhering to this principle aids courts in effectively applying constitutional law, preserving its structure, fostering fairness, protecting rights, and maintaining the Constitution functionality. It's crucial to recognize that the application of this principle can vary based on the specific constitution and jurisdiction, sparking ongoing debates among legal experts. A thorough investigation and analysis are necessary for a comprehensive understanding of how this regulation operates in a particularly legal context. Thank you.